Welcome, everybody. I'm Jason Hull, the founder and CEO of DoorGrow, the world's leading and most comprehensive coaching and consulting firm for long-term residential property management entrepreneurs. For over a decade and a half, we have brought innovative strategies and optimization to the property management industry. At DoorGrow, we are on a mission to transform property management business owners and their businesses. We want to transform the industry, eliminate the BS, build awareness, change perception, expand the market, and help the best property management entrepreneurs win. Now, let's get into the show. And my guest today is Mo Hussain, and we're going to be talking about how property management companies can stop drowning in data and start turning it into real operational growth. In this episode, Mo is breaking down the measure, map, and automate framework that he has built and an approach to uncovering hidden margins, reducing manual oversight, and getting more value out of every door in your portfolio. All right, is Mo Hussain. Mo, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jason, happy to be here.
So today we're going to be chatting a little bit about how property management companies can stop drowning in data and start turning it into real operational growth. And Mo's going to break down the measure, map, and automate framework, his approach for uncovering hidden margins, reducing manual oversight, and getting more value out of every door in your portfolio. So cool. Measuring is important. We'll get into that. So before we get into that, Mo, can you give people a little bit of background on yourself? How did you get into entrepreneurism? How did you get connected to property management? And help everybody understand who Mo is.
Yeah, great question. So I've been in this industry now for probably coming up on 20 years at this point. I worked at some of the prop tech and software providers that are prevalent in the space. Namely, I worked at both Yardi and AppFolio, which are both kind of headquartered in Santa Barbara. And a little bit over 10 years ago, I started a consultancy and accounting CPA practice that specifically focuses on prop tech and real estate. So we offer consultations with implementations, custom reporting, operationalizing around technology, which is now the buzz around kind of AI and automation at this point. And then we've also built products for the space to help with automations, help with accounting compliance, and bringing visibility and custom reporting capabilities to operators. So kind of leveraging all the experience from working as a consultant and also as an accountant, and even working at some of these tech providers now, being a actual supplier in the industry.
Very cool. Very cool. So you're a little bit nerdy.
A little bit. Data.
Okay,
I love data.
so am I.
Right.
All right. So cool. So let's talk nerdy to me, Mo. All right.
Yeah.
So let's chat about this. So let's get into it. So tell us about this. Why is this? How'd you come up with this framework? Why is this important? I love frameworks because frameworks are usually where we take something that we notice a pattern in, there's some complexity involved, and we make it simple. So explain to us, where does the measure, map, and automate framework kind of come from?
Right. And this kind of stems from a conversation you probably have with plenty of your clients and even prospects when you start engaging, the very popular question now of how do we use AI? I want to streamline and automate. And it's a very loaded, fairly ambiguous question, right? How do we use AI? We want to implement AI into our operations, right? When conversely, operators and property managers should be starting with a different set of questions, right? Where are we losing things like NOI, margin, time, control, or even consistency, right? AI really only matters when it connects, and automation really only matters when it connects to a revenue lever or some type of a cost lever, or productivity gain, or risk reduction, right?
Yeah.
And there's a couple key components, and even conversations that you've probably even had with property managers today, is that firstly, operators today, they already have a lot of data. They probably have access to a lot of different data sets across, operations, but it's probably, disconnected and disjointed in different reports and disconnected systems, hidden in spreadsheets and dashboards that probably don't drive much action, right? And everybody wants to automate and execute an operational kind of workflow. But the hard part is not whether AI can really do something, but the hard part is whether a company even knows where value is leaking and who owns that action, and and whether these workflows are even clear enough to be able to automate. And that's kind of the premise of this framework, is to kind of measure what that pain is, map that workflow, automate that repetitive work, and manage ideally performance through some type of a closed loop accountability. We just put an actual word to it and a framework to it, but I'm sure very similarly to the conversations that you're probably having also even with customers.
Yeah, yeah, got it. Yeah. It's interesting because we're now seeing a lot of these tech companies or tech forward companies that are kind of backtracking on AI a little bit. They
Mm,
were giving out basically blank checks to
right,
use AI as much as they could. Some were even creating sort of a contest internally, incentivizing like who could use the most tokens,
you're
which
right.
is a little bit insane to just give people a blank check as if that always, the more tokens you burn, the more productivity is being created. Right.
Right, right, right. And we're seeing, yeah, and as we're seeing these newer models that are coming out, whether it's, through Claude, Anthropic, or even these other LLMs, the token utilization is becoming more and more expensive, especially with these newer models. And so now the question of just like, hey, how is that utilization actually translating to actual business value, right? And this was a
Yeah.
question that eventually would have been pushed, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. Like how to use AI. Yeah. Bad question. A better question is how do we actually make sure we're creating more profit? How do we actually make sure we are lowering costs? Like, and that's the idea. They think, well, AI must be so much cheaper than people. And what's interesting, I've also seen some reports lately showing the amount of money these different LLMs are losing right now.
Hmm.
They're spending a massive amount of money to deliver AI to us at a super cheap price right now.
Right.
But they're losing money. Every time we're chatting, they're losing money.
Right.
And that's a wild business model. They're obviously hoping to win some sort of AI race. They're hoping to get us maybe in the future. And there's a lot of talk lately as well, people thinking we got to shift to local models. Like I got
Hmm.
to run this AI stuff on my own computer and not be giving all my money to Anthropic or
Right. Right.
OpenAI, OpenAI or whatever. So,
Right.
okay, cool. So let's continue on. Measure, map, and automate.
Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, going on your point, Jason, it's you also creating automation and leveraging these models locally. There's definitely value in that, but now more than ever, teams are kind of distributed, right? And so
Yeah.
ideally, if you've built automations and leveraging these LLMs and things of that sort, you probably want to have like some type of an interface that's like cloud based, right? Or for folks to be able to kind of collaborate in some type of ideally like a safe environment, right? And
Yeah.
so measure, map, and automate. So there's kind of those three components to be able to actually fully ideally leverage AI, but there's a couple like kind of key core components that I feel like is very important for folks to really understand before they can even take advantage of AI, right? So one is, AI value really truly is workflow value. And so like the biggest opportunities when it comes to automation and leveraging AI is things that are repetitive, judgment heavy, ideally high volume workflows. Think about things like, leasing follow up, delinquency, terms, maintenance triage, variance explanations. Another key thing to understand is, AI depends on trusted, ideally operational data. And so if you don't have accurate or clean property unit, resident, vendor, payment data and it's inconsistent, AI just helps accelerate the wrong answer, right? And this notion
Mm.
of like hallucinations also kind of exists. And insights without ownership is really just theater. And so although AI may identify a problem and recommend an action, things need to be routed, right? And action needs to be assigned. There needs to be some accountability that gets created there, and then a measurement of a result. And then lastly, like humans control still matters, right? Things that have a very high potential opportunity cost operators should be very careful on how they utilize AI. So, things around fair housing, sensitive decisions like screenings,
Mm,
evictions, legal communication, employee decisions, and maybe even large payment approvals. And so, once we have these kind of these table stake items, if you will, kind of addressed, then we can move on to kind of our framework of kind of measure, map, and automate. And so, and each of these different components have different purposes. The whole point of the measure step is to quantify where pain exists and to validate kind of being buying versus like building. And so you want to ask things like where time, where margin, where service quality or accountability is lost today, right? Examples can be things like days vacant, delinquency rate, maintenance response times. These would be kind of like outputs, like invoice coding time, reporting hours, renewal conversions, right?
yeah, got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you have to have good data, which the crux of where their data is all probably housed is inside of their property management software.
All right.
And so hopefully that software is kind of tracking some of this stuff. But everybody's had a CRM that the team didn't put enough notes in,
Right.
and then it becomes kind of useless, right? So you're like, what happened with Fred on that call earlier, or previously? I think we talked about this. Can't remember.
Right.
Why aren't you putting in notes? And so then the flaw becomes the human in the loop in a lot of instances. But then you're saying, also humans matter, like related to fair housing. We've got to have the human in the loop making decisions. I don't think it would fare very well to be standing in front of a judge and say, well, the AI messed this up.
Right.
It wasn't me.
All right. Yeah, that's very correct. The other thing is that software is a tool, right? So they
Yeah.
like that example that you just gave of like, hey, I had a conversation with Freddie or an owner or what have you, and the notes weren't captured. And so if there needs to be also a cultural shift within the organization to become more performance kind of driven, right? And using
Yeah.
you know places of truth. We use Salesforce in our own internal kind of CRM, and there's this old saying of just hey, if it didn't happen in Salesforce, it didn't happen at all. In other words, if your
Right.
system of record hasn't been updated and things haven't been added to it to ensure that it is correct and accurate and up to date, then the organization sees it as as it didn't happen, and somebody using anecdotal feedback of like, oh well, I did this but I just didn't update this, it means it didn't happen. And so it's very important that whatever system you're using to kind of measure different KPIs and metrics, that behaviors within the organization are shifting towards that. And it's a cultural shift that needs to also cascade also from leadership down as well.
Yeah, the advantage we have nowadays with all the AI stuff that's come out is now pretty much everything gets transcribed everywhere. So calls get transcribed, notes can be created automatically. You can also go back and check the transcription on a call or a Zoom call or recording, figure out what happened. So that, not leaving notes in the CRM is a little bit less of a problem than it was in the past. So we've chatted a bit about measure. What's important about mapping
The
or map?
mapping. Yeah. So this goes back to my previous point about like, AI value being, it is workflow value. And so,
Yeah.
you've identified, your measurements and KPIs, days vacant,
Mm-hmm.
delinquency, or whatever those KPIs may be. Next, what you need to do is map what the actual workflows that are happening, not how leadership or staff thinks it's happening. There's a very key kind of a distinction is that, a lot of operators and teams kind of assume, hey, we have a set process, but it may not be
Mm,
happening the way that they are envisioning or the way that they're assuming that this is happening. And map
yeah.
that entire workflow end to end, identify what systems are involved, where handoffs occur, where approvals are required, where judgment calls are kind of made. And so, every company has, things like experienced managers and accountants and maintenance folks, and they usually know what good looks like versus what bad looks like. And so AI here is
Mm.
to help kind of convert that tribal knowledge ideally into a repeatable operating model. And so examples of how that mapping would be is, hey, what is the entire lead to lease workflow? You know, what is the work order to completion? What is our renewal offer to signed and executed actual renewal? And so, and again, documenting that. A lot of organizations have some notion of what that workflow kind of looks like, but they haven't actually they may not have documented it, or if they did, it's not updated, and they have an out of date SOP or a process diagram, and that's a very important kind of key aspect of kind of this process.
Yeah, yeah. Well, a lot of times I end up talking with clients, and I've noticed kind of this pattern or trend in the industry of, I call it the process myth, where everybody thinks if we just had better processes, all of our hopes and dreams would come true when it comes to the ops side of the business, and we would be more profitable. And I especially see this in the 2 to 400 door range in single family or small multi-residential property management. And so the challenge there is that it's impossible to create enough processes, KPIs, and systems to make mediocre people be great.
Right.
But that doesn't stop business owners from trying.
Right.
They're like, they wake up in the morning, they're like, I want to play an impossible game today. And they still try. And I call it the process myth, because if you have really great people, even if your processes are garbage, that I've seen these businesses still perform well. But the reverse is not true. You have mediocre people, you could have insane amounts of systems and processes and stuff, and the business still has a lot of headaches and problems. And so I've kind of noticed this pattern. I call it the 3 levels of process. And level 1 is documentation. It's just like writing stuff out. But that's kind of like the owner's manual in the glove box of the car. Nobody looks at it. It doesn't get updated. It's like it's gathering dust, and people don't actually, that's not actually how the processes are run. And over time, things gravitate towards ease or grace, or what flows best for the person doing the job, not for what's best for the job sometimes.
Right.
And so it gravitates a little bit towards chaos or being worse. Then there's this level 2, which is checklists. This is where people are using things like Asana or Process Street or Lead Simple, or there's some sort of checklist-based system where now they're verifying the work's getting done in a certain way. But checklist has its own problems in that it's very linear, and not every process is linear. There's decisions and splits and merges and things happening concurrently in property management. And so the challenge with checklist also, it can tend to slow things down. It's not as efficient. So the next level, and the problem I had with checklists, we used to use Process Street, is that if anytime a process got complicated, I had to build logic and if then sort of situations into it. And it usually got to the point where I didn't even understand it. Like a year later, I'm looking at a process, and I'm like, I had to retranslate this back into something that made sense to my brain. And
Right.
and the nerd had to be the one that did all the updates on it, because nobody else could understand it. So then we eventually graduated to level 3. So level 3 is visual workflow. This is for humans. And so, and with this, my tip to everybody listening, if you have a system, whether it's checklist or it's any of these 3 levels, documentation, checklist, or visual workflow, that your first 2 processes you make as an operator or as a business owner is how to create a process in this system is number 1. And number 2, how to queue a process that is made in the system to know it's actually a good one. If you just make those 2, you don't have to do any of the other stuff. Everybody else can do it. You just make those 2. That's my tip for all you business owners. And now with AI, you can start adding AI. Once you have things
automation
visually mapped out, you've got the map like you're talking about. Now you can figure out, all right, where can AI take over some of this stuff?
Yeah.
And where do we still need the human in the loop, right? So
Right.
yeah. So any tips for those listening to this that are already geeking out with AI? They're doing a little bit of this measuring and mapping and automating. What are some of the biggest challenges you've noticed where this kind of breaks down or people are making mistakes?
It's honestly, it's the AI value. It's a lot of the small individual decisions that are made in a repetitive fashion, and that are made a lot, that really are going to unlock like true value for any operator. And so, like, having very clean data, standardized systems of truth. But what we mean by that is that, hey, whatever work order system that you're using, for example, has accurate, work order data. People, your maintenance technicians are actually closing out the work order when they complete it, not just, hey, at
Yeah.
the end of the week, I'm going to now try to remember what I did earlier in the week and close it out. So the data can't be trusted, then AI is just going to cause additional kind of confusion. And so having accurate systems of record. And I gave that example of a work order when a technician kind of closes that, right?
Yeah. 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 That makes sense.
The process map, I think the three buckets are like three level that you kind of gave. I think is a great anecdote and framing of how processes should be kind of looked at. And I think one thing that a lot of operators usually tend to overlook or assume is, how things are being done versus how they actually are being done within the teams, right? So an owner, somebody at some point said, okay, hey, this is the process we're going to take. And then over time, that just kind of got changed. And there may be, two different property managers operating in two different regions in the same company that are doing leasing renewal differently, right? Going back to
Right.
that point that you mentioned about systematizing and having accountability loops and task based or like checklist items and ensuring that those things are actually done in that same quality in that same fashion is very
Y-
key. And so getting data, like getting the right data, accurate data, and then also like your process mapping and your processes kind of documented. I think the visual representation is a great way to have that. And those are the two key things that 90% of folks that are trying to leverage AI and automation, and even the folks that are starting to try to jump into this space and trying to automate and use AI for these things, like usually where they're really struggling with.
Got it. Yeah. I think I was just on a webinar recently and they were talking about building AI agents and they were talking about if you want to make really effective AI agents, you need to give them a really good job description, just like a human. And what's really funny is we coach clients on this a lot, but if we tell the clients we coach clients on creating job descriptions. We call our version of them R docs because each section starts with an R, like role, responsibility, et cetera, all the typical stuff. But then we have some additional sections that we found really paramount. So what we'll tell them to do is go ask your team members, give them this framework and have them create their own R doc.
Mm-hmm.
And then you take a look at this and see if that's what you would have created. Because it's never like what they think their job is usually very different than what the business owner thinks their job is,
Right.
and maybe even different what the manager or the ops person thinks the job is. But then you can actually literally get on the same page with them. You can be like, negotiate this and be like, this is what we think your priorities should be and what your outcomes should be and what we want you to be able to accomplish. And this is helpful for them to know what they're aiming for so that they can please you, because your team members want to please you
Mm-hmm.
if they're good.
Mm-hmm.
But usually there's a big disconnect, like you're saying, between what the employee thinks their role and job is versus what their manager thinks they should be doing versus what the business owner thinks everybody should be doing. And so nobody's on the same page. And then everybody's roles are a little messy. And then you're going, let's give them processes now to work on. And they're not even clear on what their job is or what their role is. Yeah. And so, same thing if you were going to build an AI agent and you were like,
Right.
I want you to try and be good at everything. And then suddenly it's like really hallucinating a
Horrible.
lot and it's messing everything up. And yeah. And it's not a realistic creature, just like some people create job descriptions that are for like 4 different personality types.
Right.
And then they hire somebody that maybe can actually do all 4 things. And we call those really highly adaptable, weird creatures entrepreneurs. And then they wonder why that property manager left and stole all their clients
Right.
instead of finding somebody that's like really good at being one thing.
Right.
Yeah.
That role clarity is very important, right? And that's how you should see agents as well, is that like, hey, it's like a trained employee, and so you should expect the same level of, investment involvement, if you will, and try to help them be the best of, like, whether it's a leasing agent, a maintenance coordinator, or whatever that their role may be. And I think another aspect is, and I'm curious at like how, when you guys are having conversations with clients around role descriptions stuff, it's the concept of ownership. Like, hey, how to align ownership to, and lining that up to hopefully an eventual business outcome or KPI or something, so that their performance drives also the business performance, right? How have you guys had
Yeah.
those conversations, or how do you talk about kind of that concept? You kind of allude to it without kind of explicitly calling it out.
Yeah, I think well, sometimes I'll just totally call a business owner out on things. But I think what I think will be interesting is people are starting to build agents. I think that they should have an understanding of personality types. I think they should have an understanding maybe or a conversation with AI about what Myers-Briggs type might be good for this agentic role.
Mm,
And because like somebody that's really good at like strategy and the strategist role, which would be like an INTJ in Myers-Briggs, might be good at some operational stuff, but they would be really terrible at customer service because a lot of INTJs don't even like humans, right? And so they're logical thinkers and they're really judging and they're practical and they're introverted and they're really bad at understanding how the other person feels or even expressing that. And so you don't want to try and create AI agents that are multiple split personality types because I don't think they're going to be as effective. And you can't also, just like you wouldn't want somebody building the process, Q&A the process, you don't want them both, you don't want AI to be checking itself.
right, right.
Right. The brain that had problems doing messing things up maybe or didn't do it totally right. You don't want them checking their own work. Right. And so, yeah, so I think this is going to be interesting that people are going to be building agents and they usually think just logically, here's the context it needs, here's the role, whatever. But I think also maybe give it the personality that it wants. What's the DISC assessment for this person, this agent? What's the Myers-Briggs type for this agent? And then especially if they're communicating with humans or doing a task that you want them to be somewhat human-like, they're going to be much better at doing this if you create them in the right way. Just an idea. The other thing to know as a business owner, you need to know who you are so that you can build your dream team around you. So your advisors, whether they're agentic or human, your advisors, your team members, it should be built ultimately around you thriving and being healthy in your own business so that you've got the tools and the resources that fit you. But most business owners make the mistake of trying to build the business around the business and then wonder why they're miserable and why they're kind of a slave to their own business.
Right.
So anyway, Mo, measure, map, automate, MMA doesn't involve fighting too much.
No.
Like mixed martial arts. It's a little bit on the, less physical side of things. Fun chatting about all the AI stuff that's going. How can people, anything else that you want to add to our conversation here about this model? And then could you tell us a little bit about what you do and how maybe you help property managers with this stuff?
Yeah. So I guess just to put it succinctly, kind of a sandwich kind of takeaway. So operators don't need to wait for a perfect AI strategy. Start by identifying, measuring where value exists, where things are leaking, then mapping workflows, and then deciding what can be safely automated, and measuring whether those actions improve performance. And so, over time, we'll see that the winners are not going to be the companies that have the most amount of data, but they're the ones that can convert data into consistent operating actions across how they operate at every door. We help clients with putting together SOPs, also mapping their technology needs, where they're having operational leaks, and the business can be optimized further using technology and automation. We have a platform that we've built, PropStrata, to actually connect and help with that automation kind of efforts. And then we also do a lot of accounting and CPA work. You can reach us at www.balancedasset.solutions.com, and my email is mo@propstrata.com, or you can reach out to our team at info@balancedasset.solutions.com.
Cool. So they could take a look at this at propstrata.com?
Correct. www.propstrata.com.
Okay, cool. Very cool. All right. Yeah, check that out, everybody. It sounds interesting. All right. Well, Mo, I appreciate you coming out and hanging out with me here on the DoorGrow show and sharing everything. All right. So if you have ever felt stuck or stagnant in your property management business and you want to take it to the next level, reach out to us at doorgrow.com. We are the world's best at creating high growth property management companies in the single family residential space or the small multi space. And for a free training or how to get unlimited leads for free, text the word leads to 512-648-4608. That's 512-648-4608. Also, join our free community just for property management business owners at doorgrowclub.com. And if you want tips, tricks, and ideas to learn about our offers, subscribe to our newsletter by going to doorgrow.com/subscribe. And if you found this even a little bit helpful, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review on whatever channel you saw or heard this on. We'd really appreciate it. And until next time, remember, the slowest path to growth is to do it alone. So let's grow together. Bye, everyone.